The dog tags were cold. That was what Eleanor Murphy thought about every morning. Not David's face, not the sound of his voice, but the feeling of that small piece of metal in the palm of her hand. Cold, smooth, real. She had never actually held it. Boston, April 1945, 6 in the morning. Eleanor stood by the stove, a coffee pot in her hand, staring out the window. Boston drizzle, the kind of rain that wasn't heavy enough to soak your coat, but enough to make everything look grayer and heavier than it really was. The calendar hung on the wall. She had not torn off a single page since last September. 8 months. 8 months without a letter. Only one had come, from the War Department, arriving on an October afternoon, while she was hanging laundry outside. She still remembered the smell of, that afternoon, wet leaves and laundry soap. The smell of the last ordinary day. Missing in action. Not killed. Missing. Those two words meant she still had to wait. Had to hope. Was not yet allowed to grieve completely. Outside the window, the neighbor was pinning a newspaper to the front door. She could not make out every word clearly, but she had seen headlines like those all week. Germany close to surrender. War nearing its end. She took a sip of coffee. Bitter. She had forgotten the sugar. The war was almost over. But David still had not come home. 6,000 kilometers away, at a prisoner processing camp outside Frankfurt, another April morning was beginning. A dry eastern wind swept across the grounds. The smell of mud, machine oil, and a war slowly dying. Military headlights stretched long beams across the concrete yard. Lines of German prisoners stood waiting to be processed, long, silent, exhausted. American soldiers worked through the routine. Collect weapons, record names, separate classifications. Boring as an assembly line, until a young sergeant suddenly looked up and whispered to the man beside him. Patton. General Patton walked alone along the line of prisoners. No entourage, no escort. Hands buried in his pockets, eyes scanning each man. Silence spread around him with every step. He passed a blonde teenager, who looked no older than 17. Past a cluster of SS officers standing apart from the others, back straight, eyes forward, carrying the kind of pride only men who had gambled everything on an ideology and lost could still possess. Then he stopped. No sound. No one called for him. Just instinct, like stepping into a different pocket of air and knowing to stop before the eyes even understood why. His gaze fixed on the neck of one SS prisoner. Metal. Many small pieces of metal, swaying softly in the wind. He stepped closer. The floodlight struck directly across them, and only then did he see clearly. Not medals, not jewelry. Dog tags. American dog tags. Dozens of them strung together on a cord, hanging around the prisoner's neck like a necklace. Patton stood motionless. He began counting. His lips tightened, after every number. Not with anger, but with the expression of a man forcing everything under control, while something nameless surged inside him. 10. The prisoner stared directly back at him, without looking away, without fear. 20. The soldiers around them had stopped working. 30. 40. Patton stopped. Counted again from the beginning, slower this time. 50. 50 American dog tags. 50 names. 50 men. From where he stood, he could read some of the names, the letters stamped into the metal, small but unmistakable. He did not read them aloud, only with his eyes, in silence, as though calling the roll of men who were no longer there to answer. Somewhere among those 50 names was the name of a 22-year-old boy from Boston, a young man whose mother was still standing in a small kitchen on Dorchester Street, holding a cold cup of coffee, staring through a rain-covered window, not yet permitted to cry. 50 families were still waiting. They did not know where the truth was. They did not know that on this April morning, the truth hung around the neck of an SS prisoner, swaying in the cold Frankfurt wind. Who would speak the truth for the men who no longer had a voice? And would that truth ever make it home? Before the story continues, if this is your first time visiting WW2 Untold Vault, make sure to subscribe now. We tell the World War II stories that history books never had enough room to tell, the deeply human moments from both sides of the front line. Now, let's return to the story. Summer, 1943. Boston, Dorchester neighborhood. David Murphy lay beneath Mrs. Kowalski's water pump on the corner of Harrison Street, sweat soaking through the back of his shirt, grease smeared up to his wrists. The pump had been broken for 3 weeks. A professional repairman had quoted a price equal to an entire month of Mrs. Kowalski's wages. David had said, "Let me take a look." He was 20 years old. No mechanical degree. No experience repairing water pumps. Just a refusal to walk away from something broken that ought to be fixable. Mrs. Kowalski brought him a glass of iced lemonade and watched from the porch. From beneath the pump came the sound of whistling. Off-key, cheerful, completely inappropriate for the condition of the machine. Years later, Eleanor Murphy would tell neighbors that she could recognize her son from halfway down the street by that whistle alone. No matter what he was doing, fixing bicycles, chopping wood, washing dishes, he was always whistling, as if he simply did not know how to be silent. 2 hours later, the pump roared back to life. David crawled out, face red from the heat, grinning from ear to ear. Mrs. Kowalski tried to press a $2 bill into his hand. He refused to take it. 6 months later, David Murphy signed his enlistment papers. Volunteered. On the evening, before he shipped out, Eleanor cooked his favorite meal, Irish-style beef and potato stew with buttered toast. They ate quietly, without saying much. Near the end of dinner, David set down his spoon and spoke softly. "I have to go, Mom." Eleanor did not ask why. She had known the answer long before he said it. She only nodded and stood to clear the dishes so he would not see her face. David was assigned to the 90th Infantry Division, 3rd Army. He arrived in France in August 1944. His last letter home came near the end of that month. He wrote that the weather was colder than he had expected, and that for some reason he kept thinking about Mrs. Kowalski's water pump. September 1944, missing in action. More than 7,000 kilometers from Boston, in a small village outside Munich, Klaus Richter also lived. Through a summer morning he would remember forever. 1936, he was 14 years old. His father was a shoemaker, large hands, few words, working from dawn until nightfall in the small workshop behind their house. His mother taught elementary school and had the habit of reading aloud to him every night before bed. Klaus loved drawing maps. Not the printed ones from school books, but imaginary maps of places no one had ever explored. In 1936, joining the Hitler Youth was not a choice. It was simply expected, like going to school, eating dinner, breathing. Every German child joined. Klaus joined without thinking much about it. In 1942, he turned 20. The Waffen-SS came recruiting in the village. They did not need much persuasion. Only sharp uniforms, promises of glory, and the eyes of the entire village watching. Klaus signed his name. That is the most frightening part of this story. Not that Klaus began as an evil man, but that he began as an ordinary boy who liked drawing maps and listening to his mother read before bed. Then a system slowly ground him down, very slowly, very steadily, until he could no longer recognize the line between what he was doing and what was right. The necklace of dog tags did not begin with cruelty. It began on a battlefield in France in September 1944. He picked up the first tag from the dirt without any clear reason. Then another, until it became habit, and habit became something whose meaning he no longer stopped to question. That is how people lose themselves the farthest, not through one great decision, but through hundreds of tiny steps, each only slightly different from the last, until one day they look back and can no longer see where they started. April 1945. Patton's Third Army was sweeping across Germany at a speed never seen before. Not because Germany still had the strength to resist, but because Germany was collapsing from within. Prisoner processing camps operated around the clock, thousands arriving every day. And every day brought more evidence of what had happened over 4 years of war. At concentration camps, in villages wiped off the map, on roads littered with nameless dead. This was the stage when war crimes began to have faces, names, and records. David Murphy and Klaus Richter never met face to face, or perhaps they did, in a moment only one of them would remember. September 1944, the French-German border. The same month David mailed his final letter home, writing about the cold, and about Mrs. Kowalski's water pump. The same month Klaus Richter hung the first dog tag onto the cord around his neck. Who was really there? What truly happened in that moment? And was there anyone left who could still tell the truth when the only man who knew stood among the prisoners in Frankfurt, while the person who needed to hear it most stood in a small kitchen in Boston? Patton did not raise his voice. He merely turned to the nearest soldier and said, in a tone flat and hard as a tabletop, "Get me an interpreter. Get intelligence down here. Right now." The soldier ran. No one asked why. Patton stood facing Klaus Richter, 3 steps between them. He said nothing else. He simply stared at the necklace of dog tags hanging around the prisoner's neck, each small piece of metal swaying gently with the breath of the man wearing them. Richter stared back, directly, without looking away. That was what unsettled the American soldiers standing nearby even more than the necklace itself. Not Richter's arrogance, but his calmness. As though he saw nothing about this that required explanation. Major Harper and Interpreter Weber arrived within 2 minutes. The moment they saw the necklace, Harper turned his face away for a second before looking back. Weber stood frozen, jaw clenched tight. Patton never looked at them. His eyes remained fixed on the tags. "Ask him his name." Weber spoke in German. Richter answered briefly, his tone steady. "Klaus Richter, General Sir. Staff Sergeant, Waffen-SS, 12th Panzer Division." "Ask him where he got those dog tags." Weber translated the question. This time Richter answered at greater length, though his voice remained even, like a man describing some ordinary task he had completed during the day. Weber translated quietly. "He says he collected them from battlefields. France, Belgium, Germany, over the past year." "Ask him why," Weber asked. Richter looked directly at Patton for the first time since the questioning began and answered in a single short sentence. Weber hesitated for a beat before translating. "He says they are proof. Proof of his work. Each tag belonged to an American soldier he killed himself." The concrete yard fell silent in the way noise never becomes completely silent. Trucks still rumbled in the distance. Wind still moved through the camp, but all of it suddenly felt far away, as though an invisible wall had risen around the place where Patton and Richter stood. 50 dog tags. 50 men. Patton knew exactly what would happen next if he failed to act now. Richter would disappear into the system, processed, classified, transferred. The necklace would be confiscated as prisoner property, tagged, sealed in an evidence bag, stored away in some warehouse. From there it would become part of a court file, maybe for months, maybe for years, maybe forever, and 50 families would go on waiting, never knowing, perhaps never knowing at all. That was the real enemy here, not Richter. Time. Procedure. All the perfectly reasonable excuses for following the proper process. Patton turned to Harper. "I want that necklace removed now. Not after processing. Now." Harper hesitated for a second. Only a second, but Patton noticed. "General Sir, according to procedure, prisoner property must be." "I know the procedure." Patton cut him off before he could finish. "Ask me whether I give a damn about procedure." Harper did not ask. Patton looked back at Richter. He spoke slowly, word by word, so Weber could translate, with absolute precision. "You are a prisoner of war. You have no rights, no privileges, no property. Everything you are wearing, everything you are carrying, belongs to the United States Army now, including that necklace." Weber translated. Richter listened. His expression did not change. "Those dog tags do not belong to you. They belong to the families of the men you killed, and they are going home." Silence. Patton continued, his voice lower now, but sharper. "You can take it off yourself, or I'll have it taken off for you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Patton nodded toward the 2 MPs standing nearby. They stepped forward. Richter did not wait. He twisted suddenly, shoulder driving into the first MP, while one hand clamped around the cord at his neck. Not because he believed he could escape, but because this was the last thing he still had the power to decide. He would not surrender it willingly. The second MP grabbed him from behind, locking down his shoulders. The first reached for the cord, pulled. The metal cord held for half a second, then snapped. 50 dog tags spilled across the concrete. The clattering sound rang out, sharp, scattered, breaking into 50 smaller metallic strikes as the tags hit the ground and skidded in every direction. Then silence crashed down again, heavy and sudden as a slammed door. No one spoke. Richter stood frozen between the MPs, shoulders still tense, breathing hard, eyes lowered toward the concrete, where the tags lay scattered. For the first time since the encounter began, something changed in his expression. Not regret, not fear, something harder to name. Like a man who had just lost something he had never realized he was clinging to. The American soldiers began kneeling to pick up the dog tags one by one. No one gave the order. They simply did it instinctively, bending down, lifting them carefully, as though handling something fragile. One soldier found a tag trapped beneath the heel of his own boot, and gently picked it up with both hands. Patton watched in silence. Weak April sunlight stretched across the concrete yard, pale sunlight, the kind that came before spring had fully warmed the world. 50 small pieces of metal lay against the gray ground, each catching its own thin shard of light. The wind moved through the camp. Damp concrete, machine oil, cold morning air. And on every piece of metal, a name, stamped deep, clear, impossible to erase. Those names had hung around the neck of a stranger for months. And now they lay on the cold concrete of a prison camp in Frankfurt, waiting to be gathered, to be read, to be remembered, waiting to go home. That night, solitary confinement, eastern corner of the camp. A single yellow bulb hung from the ceiling. Damp brick walls. The temperature had dropped far below the daytime warmth, the kind of cold that did not come from winter air, but from the absence of anything warm, anything protective, anything human. Only 4 walls, and one man sitting on a concrete floor. Klaus Richter sat, with his back against the wall, his hands resting on his knees. After a while, his right hand lifted slowly, unconsciously, following the habit of 18 months. His fingers searched for the cord around his neck. Nothing. His neck was bare, cold. His hand remained suspended in the air, not lowering immediately, not searching further. Just hanging there, like a man still holding something that had vanished before he realized it was gone. Then, slowly his hand dropped. He looked up at the yellow bulb overhead, thinking nothing, or perhaps thinking too many things at once to tell, where thought ended and silence began. Back in a village outside Munich, his mother was probably still teaching elementary school, or perhaps not. The school might have been closed long ago. He did not know. His father was probably still making shoes in the small workshop behind their house, or perhaps not. The workshop might have been destroyed by bombs. He did not know that either. There was very little he knew anymore about home. But he remembered, with strange clarity, the final evening before he left. His mother reading aloud in the kitchen, her voice warm and even. Him sketching imaginary maps across a sheet of old paper. His father hammering steadily in the workshop out back, rhythmic blows like the ticking of a clock. Sitting alone in the cell, for the first time in a very long while, he no longer knew who he was, without that necklace of dog tags. At the same hour, in a field office 2 buildings away from the solitary block, Major Harper placed a small wooden box on the desk in front of Patton. Inside lay the 50 dog tags, all recovered, all counted again. They rested silently in the box, metal against metal, giving off a faint rattling sound when the box touched the desk before falling quiet again. Harper stood straight. "General, sir, according to standard procedure, these are evidence connected to a war crimes investigation. They should be transferred to the JAG office for records and—" "No." Harper stopped. Patton looked at the wooden box, not at Harper. One finger tapped softly against the desk, once, twice, then stopped. "Do you know what these dog tags are for, Harper?" Harper did not answer immediately. He knew this was not really a question. Patton continued, his voice low and measured. "They're the only way families know their sons are dead. Not missing. Not missing and maybe still alive. Dead. Where? When? How?" He looked up, directly into Harper's eyes. "You don't lock human remains in an evidence archive and slap a label on them. You just don't." Harper gave a small nod. "I want every dog tag cataloged separately. Every name traced. Every family notified." Patton paused. "And when the investigation is over, they go back to the families. Not into a file cabinet. Home." "General, sir, the investigation could take months." "Then it takes months. I didn't ask how long it would take. I asked whether it could be done. Yes, sir. Dismissed. Harper picked up the wooden box, turned, and walked out. The door closed behind him. Patton remained alone. He did not sit down. He simply stood before the desk, staring into the empty space where the box had been. Outside the window, the prison camp lights still burned. Farther away, truck engines echoed through the night. The war was not completely over yet. There was still work to do, still men to command, still maps to read, and decisions to make before dawn. But he stood there a little longer. He thought about the names on those 50 dog tags, not specific names, but that kind of name. Boys of 20, 22, 24. From Ohio, from Texas, from Boston. Places he had passed, through, or never seen at all. They had stood here, on this land, beneath this same sky, and they had not gone home. He had commanded hundreds of thousands of men. He understood mathematics, understood that in war, numbers became the language of decision. 10,000 men to hold a road. 5,000 to cross a river. Statistics, maps, speed of advance. But tonight was not about numbers. Tonight was 50 names, nothing more. He placed his hand on the desk where the box had rested. The wood felt cold beneath his palm. He left it there for 1 second, then another, like a man checking whether something was still real. Then he pulled his hand away, turned, and walked out. The next morning, the story spread the way stories spread in the army. Not through official announcements, not through written orders, but through whispers passed from one man to another, traveling from the prisoner processing camp into nearby units, carried by jeep drivers moving between checkpoints. Patton had reclaimed 50 dog tags. He had ordered them returned to the families. No one openly commented on the decision. No one said whether he was right or wrong. But that morning, at the processing yard outside Frankfurt, the American soldiers worked a little differently. It was difficult to explain exactly how, just slightly slower, slightly more careful. When recording prisoners' names into the ledgers, a few men paused a little longer than usual before moving on to the next, as though they had begun seeing something in the monotony of the work that they had never noticed before. A young sergeant from Ohio, the first man to recognize Patton the previous morning, sat alone at breakfast, staring into his coffee cup. The soldier beside him asked what he was thinking about. He shook his head without answering at first. Then he spoke softly. I have a brother, missing in the Pacific. 14 months now. The man beside him said nothing. He only nodded. Summer, 1946. 15 months after the necklace of dog tags had been torn apart across the concrete yard in Frankfurt. The investigation into Klaus Richter was complete. The findings of the 50 dog tags, only 12 had been taken from actual battlefields. The rest came from prisoners executed after capture, wounded soldiers shot in field aid stations, men who had been holding their hands up in surrender. Richter was brought before a war crimes tribunal. 47 charges. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The small wooden box was carried into the courtroom, 50 dog tags arranged in rows across the evidence table beneath the cold white glow of the overhead lights. The sentence, death. Klaus Richter was executed in March 1947. His final words were spoken in German. No remorse. No one came to claim the body. His grave bore no name. Only a number in an archive file, in a room no one visited anymore. The child who once loved drawing maps, who listened to his mother read aloud every night, had gone too far and could no longer find the way back. David Murphy was officially confirmed killed in September 1944 near the French-German border. 22 years old. The investigation concluded that he had not died in combat. He died after being taken prisoner. Boston, an August afternoon, 1946. The small kitchen on Dorchester Street smelled of flour and butter. Eleanor was baking, a habit she had kept ever since David left, because busy hands kept the mind busy too, and a busy mind could not think about too many things at once. There was a knock at the door. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to answer it. The mailman, young, unfamiliar, handed her an envelope, then gave a slight nod before turning away. She looked at the envelope. In the upper left corner, the seal of the United States War Department. She stood motionless in the doorway for a moment. The August wind drifted in, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass from the park at the end of the street. The neighbor's child was kicking a ball outside, laughter echoing through the quiet afternoon. She walked back into the kitchen, sat down in the old wooden chair David always used at breakfast, opened the envelope. Inside, a letter and a small dog tag. She read the letter first, slowly, then once again from the beginning. It said that Private First Class David Murphy had been officially confirmed killed in September 1944. It said that his dog tag had been recovered by General George S. Patton in April 1945 in Frankfurt, Germany. It said that by General Patton's direct order, the tag was being returned to the family, not stored away in a file, but sent home. Eleanor lowered the letter and picked up the dog tag, cold metal in the palm of her hand. Smooth, small, so light she could barely feel its weight, and yet she felt it clearly. Her son's name was stamped into it. For letters, sharp, unmistakable. Murphy D.J. She did not cry immediately. She simply sat in the small kitchen, holding the dog tag, staring at her son's name pressed into the metal, as though it were the first time she had ever seen his name written down and known with certainty that it was real, that he had truly existed, that he had truly been there, truly fought, truly died, that she was finally allowed to know. Outside the window, Boston was slipping into evening. The child was still kicking the ball in the street. Mrs. Kowalski next door was watering her plants. The old woman had watered those same plants every afternoon for more than 10 years without fail. Her water pump still worked perfectly from the day David repaired it. It had never broken again. Life continued, as it always did. Eleanor Murphy sat in her kitchen, holding her son's dog tag, and for the first time in 2 years, she knew she was allowed to cry. Patton never mentioned that day in his memoirs. There was no official report, no speech, nothing, except a brief order given in the middle of the night in a small field office before a wooden box resting on a desk. Send them home. Some people choose to do the right thing when no one is watching, when there are no cameras, no witnesses, no reward beyond the simple fact that it is the right thing to do. And some people, those who have lost their voices, those who can no longer speak for themselves, are still given someone willing to speak on their behalf. If one day you were the only person left who knew the truth about someone who was gone, what would you do with that truth? If this story touched something inside you, leave your answer in the comments below. Every comment helps this story reach one more person. And if you want to hear more stories like this, real moments from World War II, from both sides of the front line, subscribe to WW2 Untold Vault. We do not tell history. We tell human stories.